Hello. I was just reading some of the Lesser Key of Solomon in this very real satanic sacrificial chamber. I'm your host, Beleth Baphomet, and today we'll be digging into the devilishly devious tale of the Satanic Temple. Now, you've probably heard of Satanism and thought, goodness gracious, isn't Satan supposed to be the bad guy? Or even worse, what is the world coming to? Well, let me put those fears to rest because the Satanists we're talking about today in the Satanic Temple don't actually worship Satan. And by the way, his real name isn't even Satan, it's... Most modern Satanists and people who join the temple are good people, I'd imagine, drawn into the Satanic Temple from a promise of working towards progressive causes. Now, since 2013, the Satanic Temple has made a name for itself as a progressive organization. It advocates for free speech, has been active in fighting far-right theocracy by opposing abortion laws, and has pulled its share of stunts meeting that Christian theocracy and nationalism head-on by introducing things like Baphomet displays to counter religious monuments on Capitol grounds. Now, despite the obvious claims of devil worship, TST has openly admitted they don't worship the devil. In fact, they're a non-theistic organization. They simply use the aesthetics as political theater, wearing the pop culture perceptions of Christianity's great antagonist to draw attention to their stunts and further piss off the evangelical right. To modern Satanists, Satan is a symbol of knowledge, independence, and personal enlightenment, not a figure of evil to worship while doing sacrifices and praying for cosmic power, but a team mascot that speaks to throwing off the shackles of modern theocracy in favor of rational thought. They say as much on their website.
The Satanic Temple believes that religion can, and should, be divorced from superstition. As such, we do not promote a belief in a personal Satan. To embrace the name Satan is to embrace rational inquiry removed from supernaturalism and archaic, tradition-based superstitions.
So, none of it is real. They don't believe in demons or hell, and they don't worship Satan. But the aesthetic affords a unique opportunity to use the language of the evangelical right against them, to advocate for abortion, gay rights, and other progressive causes protected by TST as a religious organization. Or so they'd like people to believe. Like all things seen in shades of good and evil, the truth is not always apparent. And much like the religious institutions they criticize, the Satanic Temple, despite advocating for admirable principles like egalitarianism, is often no better than Catholics or evangelicals when it comes to not living up to those beliefs. Now, before we begin our ritual, I want to send a special thanks to everybody who made this video possible, primarily the folks at Queer Satanic, who have been engaged in several legal battles with the Satanic Temple over the years, as the temple has continually tried to silence them. The blog Queer Satanic is an absolutely essential work for modern Satanism, and especially keeping track of the lies and terrible history behind the Satanic Temple, and without their trove of research, this video wouldn't have happened. I also had the chance to interview them and will be sprinkling segments from that interview throughout the video. I'd also like to thank my patrons who have been so patient with me as I've summoned this video from the void. If you find yourself wanting to sacrifice a little at my altar, you can give a few bucks at the links down below, and even joining my Patreon will give you groovy little prizes like access to the Discord where we have community gaming nights and movie streams. Anyway, enough shilling, back to the video. It's a long and winding road to uncover exactly how the Satanic Temple has failed. A road filled with abuse, legal threats, harassment, Nazis, and cults of personality. So my Hellions, strap in, light your best ritual candle, and prepare to do the devil's work as I bring you the forbidden knowledge about the abuses of the Satanic Temple. Now, before we get too far into things, we need to get a couple of big points out of the way, like the difference between the Satanic Temple and the Church of Satan. The Church of Satan was founded in 1966 by Anton LaVey. LaVey was a born eccentric who seemed destined for some kind of spotlight. Coming from humble beginnings, he made a name for himself as a paranormal investigator around San Francisco, and he also had a pet lion he would walk in public, which for some reason the city made him give up. In 1966, he and a group of friends formed the Order of the Trapezoid, which was a prototype for the Church of Satan. The goal was a New Age hippie infusion of traditional religious practice and ritual with hedonistic philosophy and the glorification of the self that had been popularized by occult figures like Aleister Crowley in early 1900s esoteric circles. The Church of Satan took influence from Ayn Rand, Nietzsche, social Darwinism, and others to craft a might is right philosophy. While it began as a riff on stuffy conservative Christianity meant to draw in rebels, over time, this edgy philosophy drew in more aggressively conservative attitudes than the Church's opposition to Christianity might first lead one to assume. For his part, LaVey seemed more interested in working as a figurehead than a genuine prophet or philosopher of any kind, and many of his esoteric writings are often contradictory shambles of rhetoric haphazardly slapped together from various influences. He lavished the spotlight as a rock star, a figure of controversy. Of course, the church came under close scrutiny after the McMartin preschool trial and the ensuing satanic panic of the 1980s and 90s, but maintained a small group of adherents despite this controversy. Which is a great time to talk about the satanic panic and the culture wars of the 80s and 90s. During the Cold War and Reagan's presidency, there was a resurgent and concentrated effort to push Christian nationalism. After all, having God on our side is what made us better than those dang commies sending dogs into space. What were they sending dogs into space for? To appease their moon god. That's why. Cultural conspiracies aside, the 80s were an intense period of cultural expression that pushed the transgressive attitudes of underground 70s movements like punk and heavy metal into a more polished mainstream. There was also a glut of commercialization for genre products that expanded past just Old West and space stories, and that included a lot of fantasy aimed at adolescents. Sometimes these aspects of music, film, games, and toys intersected. But these fantastical elements referencing ghosts, wraiths, demons, and more across these varied mediums drew the ire of televangelists desperate to grow their donating audiences, politicians looking for issues to latch onto, and of course, people like Tipper Gore. As with many things seen as transgressive, issues with the demonic influences in music intersected with concerns about art being too sexual, toying with ideas of gender ambiguity, and any number of other things that made conservative parents cower in fear. While many of the concerns around things like violence in games or explicit lyrics are mostly bygone issues, the moral panic around demonic influence in art set the stage for parental outcry over violence in video games in the 1990s and 2000s, and plenty of other concerns that time has proved unfounded. Yet that doesn't mean we don't still get nerds crying out in protest about spicy art every now and again.
My first concern is that these women are describing a serious gynecological condition. And, I'm serious, that these women are suffering from some sort of serious, a bucket and a mop? This sounds like there's something that is going on here that is not biologically normal.
Thank you, Ben Bopo. Yet, because these demonic aesthetics draw such strong reactions from conservatives, and especially evangelical Christians, they've continually been pushed as politically loaded imagery, pushing back against theocratic notions of a state governed by Christian theology, which is basically the idea behind the Satanic Temple. As I mentioned, they don't actually believe in Satan, but use the image as a figurehead against the overreach of religion, particularly Christianity, and as it applies to legislation. In essence, they use the legality around religious liberty to push for progressive causes like abortion rights, religious rights, and queer rights, instead of the way Christian evangelicals might use their own doctrine as a cudgel against those same causes. The Satanic Temple is still a relatively new movement, and since being founded in 2013 has made plenty of headlines with its campaigns and advocacy for social justice, abortion rights, and the separation of church and state. Most recently, they were part of headlines when a Baphomet display in Iowa was beheaded by a Christian nationalist politician. And when you see stories like this, you might think the Satanic Temple is doing some good, in their own performative way. It's slightly cringy, but mostly harmless, right? And is it honestly any more or less silly than the traditions of any other religions to outside observers? They're pushing back against conservative overreach, prodding at the insecurities of uptight ding-dongs, drawing attention to social issues. Even if their efforts have been largely ineffective at producing tangible social change, you might be inclined to say that's okay, because they're making the people you might dislike mad. And when those people just keep reaching further and further towards an openly Christian nationalist theocracy and nobody seems to stop them, the idea of a group out there just annoying them can be kind of cathartic. It's because of publicity stunts like the aforementioned Baphomet statue that the Satanic Temple has gained a reputation as a primarily left-leaning beacon for aggressive, progressive politics that attempt to stand firmly in the way of explicitly Christian agendas. The problem with that is that the Satanic Temple isn't a progressive, forward-thinking organization, not the one many want to believe, and certainly not the one figurehead Lucien Greaves tries to put forward. The reality behind this organization is that it and Lucien Greaves have long-standing ties to far-right ideologies, that they have done tangible harm to people who have spoken against them, and that they exist primarily as a way for its leadership to profit from well-meaning progressive causes and their advocates. We can't talk about the Satanic Temple without talking about Lucien Greaves' birth name, Doug Misico, who also goes by Douglas Mesner, most often in legal documents. Doug has long been the figurehead of the organization, appearing on talk shows, podcasts, and ceremonies to give the organization's blessings. Much like LaVey, he's a figurehead, not a prophet or philosopher, though he does likewise relish his spotlight. Because the Satanic Temple is an organization spread across multiple countries, cities, and sects, there are a lot of people who have touched it. I can't necessarily blame every random Joe who happens to be problematic for giving the church a bad name. But as we will see, both Lucien, who I'll be calling Doug Misico from now on, and other prominent church figures have long histories of promoting bigotry or being a little more than friendly with those who do. To begin, let's go back to some anti-Semitic remarks made by Greaves in 2003. I want to say that while the following clip is disgusting and reprehensible, I am all for people being allowed to change and grow over time and move past their edgy phases. We've all done things we regretted at one point or another, right? As we unravel the reaction to this recording from 2003 years later, we will see it's just not that simple. And the proximity of the church's founder to open white nationalists, eugenicists, and bigots forms a trend that reaches far before the founding of the Satanic Temple. Anyway, back to 2003, where on a podcast he goes on a tirade against Jewish people and calls himself an Aryan king.
I mean, just like anti-Semitic to me isn't a bad word, it just depends.
Society we'd be living in right now, because I really think that eugenics would be something that would be used much more openly than it is now.
Like, I think it's okay to hate Jews if you hate them because they're Jewish and they wear a stupid fucking frisbee on their head and walk around and think they're God's chosen people. Exactly. But it's not okay to hate somebody just because their parents were stupid fucking Jews and wore stupid frisbees on their head and thought that Jews were God's chosen people. I mean, that's not what they choose to go along with, and they're normal people too.
If they're Jews?
Oh, if they were born of Jewish blood, but if they don't follow that whole Zionism line of bullshit, they're okay.
Are you telling me anyone with Jewish blood is okay with you?
No, I'm telling you that not everybody of Jewish blood is okay with me. It depends on if they follow the Jewish...
Do you like satanic Jews?
Satanic Jews are fine.
I don't know about that.
Then they're not
I don't like any
Jews. It's Zionism.
Hey, Jew blood, one drop of Jew blood means you ain't breaking bread with me, motherfucker. Why, you Jew? You Jew?
Yeah, no, some of the...
Hey, he's getting upset. I think his ears are turning red. I think his last name might be fake for a Jew.
Fuck, look at me.
Well, maybe...
I'm an Aryan king.
Maybe so many of the Jews wouldn't have been killed if they wouldn't have all turned on each other like they did during World War II.
When this audio came to light in 2018, it understandably caused a bit of a kerfuffle, though it was known about as early as 2015 during a Reddit AMA with Jex Blackmore. It's not a good look for the head of a progressive organization to be espousing blatant anti-Semitism. The temple ran damage control, so here's part of Lucien's statement regarding his history.
Even as I may be defending myself against what that material was not, I still must admit that I today do not agree with my opinions expressed then in any way. To me, back then, I was speaking of people who would take, say, Leviticus literally and try to impose its laws upon the world. I grew up as ignorant white trash in a deeply divided and violent area which heavily affected my worldview. At the time of this recording, while still in my early 20s, I thought that the triumph of LaVeyan Satanism was that it deracialized a quote-unquote survival of the fittest, productive, merit-based social Darwinism. I used to hold the position that religious superstition shouldn't be quote-unquote normalized as I saw it as such a problematic force in the world. I was an ignorant kid with a lot of outrage and a big idiot mouth that received just as many threats to my life by Nazis as I do today. The Satanic Temple will always be for anybody of any background who identifies with the values we espouse, and today you can count on me to vigorously defend any religious group's right to equal representation and expression anywhere.
During a legal statement in an Arkansas trial in 2020, Misko also went on record about this incident, saying,
I was making an inarticulate point that it is okay to be critical of superstitious religious beliefs, but not okay to be critical of somebody's ethnic or ancestral background, and that I would not agree with that statement today.
These aspects of might makes right style social Darwinism will pop up again, so keep them in mind. So, all's well that ends well, right? He's owned up to the mistakes of the past and put it behind him. Fair enough. Well, not quite. But before I talk more about the Might is Right broadcast, I want to talk a bit about some of the work that was done to try and excuse some of Misko's words here. Other figures in the movement came out with opinions on this event, like Stephen Bradford Long, who ran a fairly popular satanic blog at the time. Long essentially argued that Greaves' outburst was a case of mismanaged anti-theism, not anti-Semitism, and that we should always keep conversations open and allow people to admit their mistakes. But when you go through this blog post where Long talks about this, you uncover some other odd ties. For example, Long lists Penemu as a friend in the Satanic Temple. Penemu, real name Greg Stevens, is a prominent member in the movement who still serves as director of ministry for TST's ordination program to be ordained as a satanic minister. The church charges $149 upfront and has a $59 annual renewal fee. Stevens is also a one-time contributor to Breitbart and has been friends with far-right figures like Milo Yiannopoulos and Mike Cernovich, who even credited Stevens as an editor for his Manosphere manifesto, Guerrilla Mindset. Cernovich, notably, also has ties to Mark Randazza, who we will talk about eventually because Mark has managed to fall ass backwards into a dizzying array of assorted assholes over the years. But back to Long. Long was a leader in the Satanic Temple at this point, and as such had likely signed an NDA. Typically, an NDA means non-disclosure agreement, and is commonly signed when coming into an organization that might not want trade secrets leaked like a manufacturing company or media organization. In the case of the Satanic Temple, however, NDA means non-disparagement agreement. In this blog post discussing the incident in 2003, Long essentially skates over Doug's anti-Semitic remarks. He also doesn't show the full context of the recording, which was a 24-hour variety show Doug had been a part of. So, let's look at the full context because the issues with this 24-hour radio special go far beyond anything that could be considered a slight slip-up. The radio show as a whole was a promotional effort launching a new version of the book Might is Right, which had been first published in 1896 by Ragnar Redbeard and was a proto-fascist screed that advocated intense individualism and open racism towards Jewish people, black people, Chinese people, women, and anyone else who isn't the right exact brand of white dude. Decades later, Anton LaVey would take liberally from the publication for the Satanic Bible, however, wisely dropping much of the more blatant racism. The original, however, is something Doug has continued to defend and even pushed to be one of the Satanic Temple's foundational texts. Outside of Doug's fixation, Might is Right has been a popular script in white supremacist circles for decades. One of the selling points of this new version was illustrations by Doug Misko. This is a book he has been obsessed with for years. As might be expected for a show revolving around a new edition of well-known racist literature, there were plenty of other people with questionable or outright bigoted ties. like where a Holocaust-denying musician, Zerad von Staff, brings up eugenics, which Lucian then says,
It just threw things off, and I think it speaking of eugenics, it kind of gave eugenics a bad name too. Well, it completely ruined it.
Threw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak.
Exactly.
Well, precisely.
essentially saying eugenics isn't a bad thing. Later in this same show, Doug advocates for eugenics on the basis of qualification to breed. He literally responds to a question about a person with low IQ, saying that person should not be allowed to breed.
I'm not saying ugly children. Wait a minute. I'm saying ugly children. I think that if you've got a gene that is recessive and you're going to have an ugly kid and you're tested, you shouldn't breed. Now, I mean, what does that make me?
I'm not sure, but I'm thinking more along the lines of parental qualifications.
All right. How about a person with a low IQ who is not likely to be able to give a child the quality of husbanding that is necessary for the competitiveness of the 21st century?
I do believe that type of person should not be allowed to breed.
Okay.
Now, these additional quotes kind of paint Long in a bit of a worse light, don't they? Essentially running interference and hand-waving some assertions that go far beyond simply being anti-theist. Advocating for eugenics and Nazi ideas is indicative of a much more serious issue, one that Long did not come close to covering in his blog post on the controversy. But if you're thinking this is all the controversy there is, this isn't even close. On the same broadcast, Doug talked even more about eugenics with Tom Metzger.
I'm in the room with my wife, Amy, and the gentleman who did some of the artwork for Might Is Right. His name's Doug. He had a couple questions for you, Tom.
Okay, Annie and Doug.
How you doing?
Pretty good. How are you?
All right. So are you still head of the White Aryan Resistance?
That's me, yeah. I'm the director.
Okay.
What's your website, Tom?
Resist.com.
Tom Metzger is a former Grand Dragon in the KKK and founder of the White Aryan Resistance. These weren't new developments in 2003, by the way, as the White Aryan Resistance movement had been founded in the 1980s before being bankrupted by a highly publicized lawsuit over the death of Ethiopian college student Mulugeta Sarah. This is something that Doug Missico had knowledge of during the interview. Now, Metzger hadn't been one of the 3 neo-Nazis who murdered the innocent student, but when asked about the slaying, he said the murderers did a civic duty. From a Time article during the trial.
Acting as his own lawyer, war leader Metzger is casting himself as a beleaguered populist, but not an instigator of violence. I'm a white racial separatist, Tom Metzger says, and I can sit down with any person, white, black, or oriental, and talk about it. Metzger's easygoing Cracker Barrel manner in Portland is belied by the angry messages he tapes for war telephone lines. There, he calls non-whites mud people and assorted scum. Attorney D's is Morris the pervert. Trial Judge Answer L. Haggerty, who is black, is an Uncle Tom, and the trial, says Metzger, is a legal lynching.
Metzger had been a prominent voice in skinhead and racist movements throughout the 1980s and 1990s, broadcasting his hateful views to thousands. Which begs the question, why was Doug Missico talking to him so openly about eugenics, which he agreed with if this was just a temporary lapse in judgment? To have an open, well-known neo-Nazi with ties to actual hate crimes and murders on a live stream talking about eugenics while promoting a new version of a tome beloved by fascists, he is one bedsheet away from a Klan rally, and this is not exactly a whoopsie-doo. Yet, that's not the end of it. Throughout the stream, Doug dropped hard N-words and plenty of slurs for disabled people. He also prank called a suicide hotline.
So where do you work?
Where do I work?
Mm-hmm.
Work in the motherfucking McDonald's.
Mm-hmm.
28 years old and I'm working at McDonald's.
Well, there's some people older than that working at McDonald's. There's nothing wrong with that.
Oh, there's plenty wrong with that. You know, the other day somebody took a shit and smeared it on the walls. They made me clean it up. They told me if I didn't want to clean it up, go ahead and leave.
Oh, really? They did that in the bathroom?
Yeah, they did. Some sick prick smeared it all over the walls, went to town.
It should be noted that while Doug tried to hand-wave away most of this as being young, dumb fun, by public records, he would have been around 28 years old. One last point about this live stream was an interview with George Birdie, a white supremacist who had been imprisoned for an assault of an activist woman. Despite claiming to have left white supremacy behind him after prison, in a 2017 video he revealed he never really had, which is kind of important to think about for someone like Doug Missico, who has been in close proximity with violent racists and claims to have left it in the past, despite evidence to the contrary. Many defenders of Doug have tried to hand-wave this away as a simple one-up, a lapse in judgment on Missico's part. However, that doesn't square with this broadcast the following year, where Doug talks a little bit more about fascism during the ABCs of the Alphabet broadcast.
I go to other countries, I still see fuck on the wall. I never see written on a wall.
Interesting.
When I was in Italy, I didn't see anywhere.
But you went to the fascist leader's house.
Actually, I was in a fascist neighborhood right outside the Vatican, and it was a real nice, clean area. But you would see swastikas spray painted, like the crosshairs. I don't know what you call that, but it was a fascist symbol, a circle with just the crosshairs in it, with little fascist logos and everything else. It was a clean area, nice area. If you went to the shitty side of town on the wrong side of the tracks in Rome, saw little hammers and sickles painted on the walls and shit like that. That was the difference.
Wow, that's crazy.
I think it says a lot, and I think it stands to reason.
And you bought that T-shirt. What did your T-shirt say?
Oh, in Italian, it says, "You're with us or you're against us," and it's a fascist shirt. It was a fascist logo on it. I actually got it at a little fascist kiosk outside of Gabriel D'Annunzio's palace.
And who is that again?
He is, he was like the first fascist. He's the godfather of fascism. Italian World War I hero that occupied the Promised Territories after the First World War with the black shirts. One of those hidden heroes. People should look him up. Look him up on the internet.
But let's fast forward to 2013, when the Satanic Temple is officially founded by Doug Missico, Kevin Soling, and Shane Bugbee is also hanging around. It's important to get all this background info on who these three are, not just because of the controversies that lay ahead for the Satanic Temple, but because of the lengths they've gone to stop people from talking about their pasts. Which is why I started by talking about the Might is Right broadcast, because Doug isn't the only person in the Satanic Temple with a history of questionable ties to bigotry and hate or incendiary stunts. So, with our broad discussion of Doug out of the way, let's get to Kevin Soling and Shane Bugbee. There's just so much to talk about with Kevin Soling. Before co-founding the Satanic Temple, Kevin Soling, aka Malcolm Jerry, his name most often used in legal documents, journeyed to a South Pacific island called Tana and posed as a messianic cargo cult figure named John Frum in the mid-2000s. The John Frum cult was formed by inhabitants of Tana after World War II, where the indigenous people built a system of worship using discarded junk and wares left behind by the Allied troops after the end of the war. From a Smithsonian article on the John Frum cult in 2006.
You get cargo cults when the outside world, with all its material wealth, suddenly descends on remote indigenous tribes. The locals don't know where the foreigners' endless supplies come from, and so suspect they were summoned by magic, sent from the spirit world. To entice the Americans back after the war, islanders throughout the region constructed piers and carved airstrips from their fields. They prayed for ships and planes to once again come out of nowhere, bearing all kinds of treasures: jeeps and washing machines, radios and motorcycles, canned meat and candy.
And so, ever since, this isolated population has worshipped this John Frum, who is believed to have been a benevolent USGI of some kind during World War II. The story of the John Frum cult is fascinating, and I recommend reading through the whole Smithsonian article linked below because it's a deep look into how religions are formed, how faith groups split into different sects, and even regional battles can be waged over a religious figure of a World War II soldier. So, in the early 2000s, Kevin Soling set out to this island and sought to convince the residents that he was their returned messiah, John Frum, an experience captured in the documentary film John Frum, He Will Come, which he also gave himself writing and directing credits on. For years, he would journey to the island, bringing an assortment of goods from the mainland for the purpose of dazzling the inhabitants into believing him to be the returned spirit of John Frum. At one point, he even handed out necklaces adorned with the image of his face. This experience was expanded on in the book by Christopher Lord with the help of photojournalist John Tonks, The Men Who Would Be King, which charted the phenomena of people like Solling attempting to convince these islanders that they were the dearly departed Messiah, John Frum. Their depiction of Kevin is not flattering, revealing an ignorant and privileged young man who sees himself as destined for some kind of greatness that's been denied him by the time he was born in.
It's a sad, sad time we're living in, Kevin said, when status is founded on the degree of how offended you are and the greater virtue you can claim. He blamed in part America's postmodern campus culture. In his speech to Sulphur Bay, Kevin said that America's Second World War experience in Vanuatu represented for him the best of his country. Benevolent protectors of the Pacific, dashing, victorious, welcomed. Where in the world is America, or the West in general, still viewed that way? Where else do white faces still get a warm wave from the roadside? Perhaps Kevin's desire to realize the John Frum story was his own ghost dance, a kind of ancestor worship for an America that had run off the rails, been stultified by postmodernism and political correctness.
Already, there's so much to unpack here. As with everything in this video, Queer Satanic has gone through the exhaustive effort to research and compile a list of sources, so please check out their articles on the subject for more in-depth research. But here we can see Solling, a Harvard-educated white man who had a posh upbringing, as desperate for a fawning spotlight. That's the way I personally see this. As a documentarian, it's one thing to insert yourself into a story or populace, but it's another entirely to try and hijack a religious movement and place yourself at the center. I don't know how much more even needs to be said here, because there's a lot that can be said about an affluent white man purposefully trying to General Kurtz his way into the graces of an islander population, but it seems like, on its face, it's bad for a myriad of reasons that should be obvious. Yet, this story is just a jumping off point for every other aspect of Solling, whose wealthy landlord parents sued tenants into evicting, including one whose mother had just died. Through the 90s, he sought a filmmaker spotlight, working on documentaries on subjects like trepanning and the health benefits of drinking urine. He also has a long-running fixation with popular far-right ideals like homeschooling. While promoting a documentary on the subject, he did an interview with Stefan Molyneux, well-known eugenicist and racist. You might say, homeschooling isn't a far-right idea, and on the surface, yes, I'd agree with you. It's a totally morally neutral thing that in a perfect world would see stay-at-home parents engaging in a more personal, though still rigorous and extensive curriculum. The problem is that is not often the case. More and more, especially, homeschooling is used as a cudgel by right-wing parents to keep their kids away from other groups like people of color, LGBTQ youth, and more, in addition to teaching kids rhetoric that aligns with radical or even hateful values. Solling mostly advocates for homeschooling from a place of personal experience, feeling he was let down by his experiences in public schools. This actually sounds a bit like Matt Walsh's experience, which I documented here, but his advocation puts him in proximity with others like libertarian groups and white supremacists like Molyneux. And it's interesting to look specifically at the arguments Kevin makes because they can be tied into his wider views on society and social change.
All compulsory schools have a hierarchical structure with students at the bottom, powerless to control the basic things that affect their lives. Second, all dissent is suppressed. And these features aren't even under dispute. They're recognized, they're acknowledged. You can't run a classroom unless you have a docile student body who takes orders in obedient fashion. So these features are presented as being for the benefit of the students. Well, political scientists have a term for this type of construct. It's called benevolent despotism.
This trend of chasing purposefully incendiary or bizarre topics and using them to get notoriety is important, because there's some real evidence that the Satanic Temple itself started as a measure to simply make another documentary in a long line of them that relied on publicity stunts. Kevin, as owner of Spectacle Films, helped take part in the first mentions of the Satanic Temple in 2013 before the organization had even incorporated. We will talk more about Shane Bugbee in a moment, but after a falling out with the Satanic Temple, Bugbee gave an interview to journalist Anna Merlan confirming that the original behind-the-scenes plans for the Satanic Temple were for a mockumentary-style film in the tradition of spectacle films' previous output like The War on Drugs. Which leads me to bring up this HuffPost article talking about a publicity stunt by Misako in 2013, Satanist for Rick Scott, which was revealed by the Miami Herald to have been part of a casting call on Actors Access. From the HuffPost article.
Spectacle Films and Polemic Media, the companies behind The War on Kids and Freeloader, are producing a mockumentary about the nicest satanic cult in the world. We are looking for actors for 8 speaking roles to play minions, as well as 10 featured extras. We are seeking people from all walks of life, goths, grandparents, soccer moms, etc., to be the followers of a charismatic yet down-to-earth satanic cult leader. The shoot will be on January 25th in downtown Tallahassee. Actors will be required to wear tasteful satanic garb.
This footage would later be used in the 2018 film Hail Satan, which we will talk about more in a bit. Enter another party in the founding of the Satanic Temple in 2013, Shane Bugbee. Bugbee started the Mike Hunt publishing company in the late 80s to play host to a variety of puerile, violent, and otherwise misanthropic content nobody else would publish. By his own attesting on his blog, he asked Anton LaVey himself to write a new intro to his publisher's version of Might is Right, and LaVey jumped at the chance. Eventually, he was invited to be a high priest at the Church of Satan, and even conducted LaVey's final interview before his death, so the two were purportedly close, according to Bugbee. By Bugbee's telling, this led then college student Doug Misako, aka Lucien Greaves, to his door, where the two would eventually collaborate on a version of Might is Right mentioned at the beginning of the video.
Not long after that, Doug was accepted to Harvard University. He used to call me, shocked that his professors were taking him to lunch and inviting him to meet with luminaries like Richard Dawkins. Doug's studies at Harvard focused on neuroscience, and he began delving deeply, and sometimes dangerously, I felt, into the world of false memory related to ritual abuse and alien abduction, even exposing professional psychologists as culprits and forcing them to recant, retire, and even run.
This isn't the only time Bugbee would mention Doug's odd predilection for questionable things, like this court transcript where he describes Misako's fixation with fascists and tyrants. This fixation is corroborated with additional audio from the ABCs of the Alphabet broadcast where Misako praised Italian fascism. Shane himself has a long history of publicity stunts, such as 2001's Angry White Male Tour, a stunt tour for Mike Hunt, Bugbee's publishing company. The event hosted far-right personality Jim Goad, an incendiary writer who has been called the godfather of the new right and has been cited by name as one of Gavin McInnes' favorite writers. Gavin McInnes, for those who don't know, the founder of the Proud Boys. Misako has spoken openly about being enamored with the tour and the speakers on it. Bugbee puttered around various projects like documentaries and political activism until 2011 when he became a member of the Center for Healing Spiritual and Cultic Abuse, which also included Doug Misako. In court documents, he also talks about Misako considering a quote-unquote new version of Might is Right around the same time, updated for more modern social standards, something that very well may have been the seeds of what would become the Satanic Temple. So here we have Shane Bugbee, a incendiary underground zine publisher with a history of cavorting with distaste, Doug Misako, a well-educated man with special interests in cults and mind control, and Kevin Soling, a wannabe documentarian who has been engaging in purposefully over-the-top stunts and had a history of fostering his own attempted cult of personality. Here's another interesting tidbit from one of Shane Bugbee's blog posts where he disavowed TST after falling out with the organization over unpaid dues. Quote, "Is starting a religion and or becoming a filmmaker even a respectable use of that Harvard degree in cognitive science? Why would someone study the mind and then go and make films if their intent wasn't a want of manipulation? Art and film schools certainly are not producing brain surgeons." Then Doug told me his main motivation for the Satanic Temple was profit, to create a substantial income. That was enough for me to want to cease helping in any way and to question the true intent of the project. End quote. Sometime later, Shane Bugbee was brought into spectacle films as a consultant, seeking to use his notoriety for marketing. After his split with the Satanic Temple, Shane Bugbee laid bare the original plan, which was to be another prank and an ensuing documentary as Kevin Soling had made in the past. From a Catholic news agency article quoting Bugbee's interview in The Village Voice. Bugbee said at first he saw the Satanic Temple as a prank, believing it was thrilling to participate in a, quote, joke on the public at large and, in general, the grossly inept media, end quote. He said the group's purpose seemed to shift after the fake rally for Rick Scott. Quote, the dissolving of the original idea of making a mockumentary and the rise of a want for a real religious sect seemed to happen very quick, said Bugbee. He objected that Solling and Guinan had, quote, no real relationship with Satanism. Later, in additional court documents, he explicitly states he believed Doug Misko only ever intended to use the Satanic Temple to make money. Bugbee has been adamant about the cynicism of the Satanic Temple and Lucien Greaves, and how it doesn't align with the classic LaVeyan Satanistic philosophies. For whatever that's worth from somebody who peddled garbage like Bugbee did. Outside of his legal testimony and other evidence he's provided, I don't find Shane Bugbee to be a particularly reliable source. Yet Bugbee's look behind the curtain into the origins of the Satanic Temple, along with the pasts of Solling and Misko, paints a drastically different picture of the Satanic Temple than the one it tries to portray for itself. The people behind this organization have a history of offense for offense's sake, consorting with true racists and bigots, attempting to subvert others to their own ends, or at the very least, in Misko's case, taking a special interest in cults and brainwashing. Which brings me to the question, why is the Satanic Temple primarily known today for being a stalwart of progressive values fighting against evangelical overreach? Based on the failed GoFundMe for the aforementioned Adopt a Highway project and escalating with the Satanists for Rick Scott stunt, the Satanic Temple as an organization was officially founded in 2013. After the Rick Scott rally, the Satanic Temple counter-protested the Westboro Baptist Church's hate rally after the Boston Marathon bombing by holding a pink mass on the gravesite of Westboro Baptist Church founder Fred Phelps' mother, which entailed having queer couples make out on her grave, and Doug Mesner, now going by the name Lucien Greaves, declaring that the right had made Phelps' mother gay in the afterlife. According to Shane Bugbee's testimony, many of these people who kissed on the grave were hired actors, just like the Rick Scott stunt, and Lucien had a hard time getting them to actually kiss. Lucien himself kind of confirmed this during courtroom testimony, actually. Following these came the stunt that really rocketed the Satanic Temple to prominence and solidified TST's image as radical pushback to Christian nationalism, attempting to install a Baphomet display as an answer to a monument of the Ten Commandments on Oklahoma Capitol grounds. The Ten Commandments were eventually removed in 2015, but not before tens of thousands of dollars of funds were raised to commission a Baphomet statue were put towards its eventual construction. It's also important to note that while the Satanic Temple claims victory for this case, the real legwork was done by the ACLU, not the Satanic Temple. Understandably, though, this stunt rocketed TST to national prominence, and soon more ostensibly progressively minded people were drawn into the fold. In the following years, the Satanic Temple would continue to grow its notoriety and influence by engaging in not just publicity stunts, but lawsuits over things like 10 Commandments being displayed on Oklahoma Capitol grounds after raising over $20,000 for a Baphomet statue to also be placed on the grounds. This statue would be wheeled out a few years later for a protest in Arkansas, but has yet to be erected anywhere permanently. It's worth noting TST also erected a display for holiday observations in 2023 that was beheaded by Mississippi Christo-fascist representative Michael Cassidy, which was eventually classed as a hate crime against a religion. From the beginning, Doug has been adamant that the temple's goal was to use religious iconography to fight theocratic fire with fire, rather than being a proper religion. In a 2013 interview with Shane Bugbee in Vice, Greaves says, quote,
"The Satanic Temple was actually conceived of independent from me by a friend and one of his colleagues. They envisioned it more as a poison pill in the church/state debate. The idea was that Satanists, asserting their rights and privileges where religious agendas have been successful in imposing themselves upon public affairs, could serve as a poignant reminder that such privileges are for everybody and can be used to serve an agenda beyond the current narrow understanding of what the religious agenda is."
Going back to the Baphomet statue for a bit, at first glance, the stunt to install the statue seemed to follow everything Lucien says here. It's an answer to Christian theocracy with something the evangelical right finds distasteful, and using their rhetoric to push it through. And because so many people in this country dislike the measures taken against freedoms in the name of Christianity, it garnered TST a reputation for that pushing back. Except in the 10 plus years since, they haven't done much to tangibly push back, in spite of plenty of highly publicized lawsuits. The Satanic Temple would be founded on 7 basic tenets, urging equality, egalitarianism, and including strictures like one's body is inviolable, subject to one's will alone, a tenet specifically made, seemingly, to help advocate abortion and reproductive rights, free speech, and personal freedoms. Abortion rights are probably one of the biggest selling points for the Satanic Temple, one that they use, according to former members, to essentially sell merchandise and memberships. In my talk with Nathan Sullivan and David Johnson of Queer Satanic, they lay out what they call a hope grift.
They sign up for the newsletter because that is like how TST measures in quote marks its active membership. But like those people are joining because they think that that will give them a religious exemption for the abortion bans and stuff. They don't really have any like actual experience with like the Satanic Temple's communities as they exist in like meat space. But they understand at some level, because of the branding, that TST is supposed to be the biggest, the main counterweight to the Christian right. So they are obliged at some, like, or rather they feel compelled at some level to give TST the benefit of the doubt. Like a lot of people are drawn these days to like the concept of like TST having an abortion exemption. It's a lie, of course. It is blatantly, like, it is deliberately false, like by design of Doug and Kevin. They have pretty much admitted it in court. They knew that it was false before trying to slap it on billboards in red states around the country. But it persists because the Christians are trying to take away abortion rights. Obviously, the Satanists must have some silver bullet to bring it back.
It makes people who are trying to get abortions and people who are trying to continue abortion access and abortion services, it makes them more in danger because they're being associated with something they don't want to be associated with, and they already have like enough issues. And the other thing is the like magical thinking that's involved, that like we can preserve abortion rights with this one weird trick. And unfortunately, the media as a whole loves it. Conservative media loves it because they can talk about the evil devil worshippers. They're actually trying to sacrifice your babies, et cetera, et cetera. But like the liberal media, the so-called mainstream media also loves it because it's nice to think, hey, even with all of these like terrible political movements that have been working for 40 years, and even with the Federalist Society, and even with the Supreme Court, with this one card, you can protect yourself against all of that. That's a very enticing idea, but it's a hope grift. The thing that makes it so dangerous is that you let yourself be lulled into a false sense of security instead of doing the really hard, boring, necessary work of fighting back against these things.
See, when the Satanic Temple first came out swinging against abortion restrictions, they took on cases where they advocated for abortion rights, like the case of Mary Doe, which began in 2015. The Satanic Temple sued against Missouri's abortion ban, only for the case to be dismissed because Mary Doe was no longer pregnant during the suit, meaning that the Satanic Temple lost its standing to be able to argue the case in federal court. When the Satanic Temple attempted to move the case to the Supreme Court, they declined to hear it. Yet, despite the case not being certified, TST still features the case on their website, framing it intentionally or accidentally as pending and something ongoing. This 2015 case got a lot of press for the Satanic Temple, however, the lawsuits they lose have not been nearly as publicized, usually quietly being thrown out. When it comes to court proceedings, TST seems woefully inept, often overlooking important aspects of their litigation or submitting flimsy cases that they don't even seem to be trying to win. When it comes to more cases of battling Christians for free speech, like with the Baphomet statue, they also haven't made much of an impact. Like in the 2018 suit against the city of Scottsdale, Arizona, where the temple sued over not being able to say a prayer at the council meeting. The case itself, which you can read in the link below, states, quote, plaintiffs argued that case law conclusively holds that Satanism is a religion, entitled to protection. But plaintiffs' cases are all free exercise claims brought by prisoners seeking accommodations to practice Satanism in prison. It is not clear these cases should control in the legislative prayer arena. End quote. This is an excerpt of the original brief from the city, essentially trying to get the case thrown out on account of the Satanic Temple's lack of standing. The case did proceed, however, before it was thrown out in a Ninth Circuit court. Additionally, the judge presiding said the Satanic Temple, quote, had failed to prove by a preponderance of the evidence that the city had discriminated against it on the basis of the temple's religious beliefs or identity. Essentially saying that they can't even argue their own case. A similar case took place in Boston, where the Satanic Temple sued the city, again over a complaint about not being able to do a satanic invocation at a city council meeting. The Satanic Temple claimed that the council prayers violated Satanists' First Amendments by simply happening, which the court dismissed, stating in the filing that the burden of proof fell to the Satanic Temple in this case, and they failed to show how their rights were being violated. From the filing, quote, the city has neither conditioned receipt of an important benefit on conduct proscribed by a religious faith, nor has it denied such a benefit because of conduct mandated by a religious belief. And there is no indication that the city council's legislative prayer practice has made it more difficult to practice certain religions, because the Satanic Temple's right to maintain its religion has not been hampered by the city council's legislative prayer practice. Judgment must be awarded in favor of the city. But issues of free speech are far from the only thing regarding the Satanic Temple that often gets thrown out. Like this suit against Indiana's 2023 abortion ban that was thrown out with this local news article saying, quote, the temple argued it still had a right to assist its Indiana members by providing abortions as needed, in accordance with their religious beliefs, via their mailing operation. But the judge pointed out that this abortion pill via mail method was prohibited under both federal and state law, end quote. While the Satanic Temple has office space for an abortion clinic in New Mexico, that only entitles them to provide care there. It's not actually a clinic, though, but a telehealth center. The dismissal of the Indiana suit also says, quote, the fact that the Satanic Temple, 1, does not name the members on whose behalf it brings the suit, and 2, lacks a current Indiana abortion clinic are both at the center of defendant's motion to dismiss for failure to state a claim and lack of standing, end quote. In layman's terms, this is saying that in the suit, the Satanic Temple is not naming any members of the church who are being denied abortion care, in addition to not having a clinic in Indiana. Now, instead of trying to find actual people in the Satanic Temple in Indiana, the church responded saying, in the place of identification, the Satanic Temple offers a statistics-based declaration as, quote, the requisite proof that 94 members of the Satanic Temple will be, quote, individually harmed by the Indiana abortion ban every year, and at least one is pregnant at any given moment in time, end quote. So instead of giving concrete examples of how it violated their rights, the Satanic Temple instead opted to give hypothetical statistics, which is not a convincing argument in court, it turns out. The court responded saying, quote, this explanation does not assuage the court's concerns. It is still based on statistics and probabilities that may or may not be accurate. The Satanic Temple has not verified any of the data in a real-life setting to determine if any actual women fall into any specific category. They would go on to file a similar lawsuit in Idaho, yet it met a similar fate. We could also talk about the federal lawsuit in Texas taken on behalf of Ando in 2021, which was dismissed by a federal judge who cited the suit as being, quote, spare and cryptic, and said, quote, their broad and conclusory allegations are devoid of actual facts, at most offering labels and conclusions and a formulaic recitation of the elements of a cause of action, end quote. From the Texan, quote, the bad faith exhibited by the Satanic Temple in the lawsuit led Eskridge to the dismissal decision. He added that repleting would be futile due to the representing attorney's conclusory, reductive, and intemperate filings and performative and obstinate conduct, end quote. Both of these lawsuits, however, were highly publicized by the Satanic Temple members and through press releases, and all of these suits are currently listed on the Satanic Temple's website, on the same page where they ask for more money to continue litigation efforts. In the past, these events have been covered by Time, Vice, and plenty of other reputable outlets, which rarely follow up on how these cases end. What's more, abortion right groups have actively denounced the Satanic Temple in the past, despite TST ignoring them and continuing to file these lawsuits that continue to get thrown out as recently as 2023. The Satanic Temple's approach is to essentially claim that being a member provides exemption from abortion laws, including a note meant to give religious exemption to care providers when a patient presents it. This, however, actually isn't legally binding and can cause health or legal issues if the patient seeks an abortion via pill, for example, and they aren't protected by this thin promise from the Satanic Temple. From a 2022 Jezebel article linked down below.
Denise Rodriguez, communications manager for the Texas Equal Access Fund, or T, an abortion fund serving North Texas, said she's wary of the Satanic Temple promoting an unproven loophole, especially for people who manage their own abortions with pills. People could possibly put themselves at risk for criminalization trying to do this, Rodriguez told Jezebel. The Satanic Temple encouraging people shows a lack of understanding or knowledge about how the criminal justice system can actually really harm a lot of marginalized communities. More than 1,300 people were criminalized for their pregnancy outcomes between 2006 and 2020, according to National Advocates for Pregnant Women.
Later in the Jezebel article, Rodriguez continues to warn against the Satanic Temple's approach to abortion care, saying,
I just want to make sure that people are aware about organizations that might not be good for them, like crisis pregnancy centers, and the Satanic Temple is kind of part of that.
For all of these slip-ups and failures, the Satanic Temple has managed to keep a progressive sheen on their image and have continued to announce lawsuits to take action in defending the rights of its members as developments continue, like the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And in turn, these lawsuits, press releases, and more have been used to gain supporters and donations for the Satanic Temple. But where does that money actually go? See, that's actually a very tricky question, because the Satanic Temple is more than one organization, or rather, I should say, more than one company. While the Satanic Temple likes to put forward a facade of emulating a church structure, as shown in a filing in its TSTK v. Thurston case, where, in response to declining to release their tax returns, the Satanic Temple defined itself as, quote, an umbrella term for a religion which is given legal structure by a constellation of affiliate entities, end quote. Once again, I must point you to Queer Satanic, who have done the invaluable legwork in researching and compiling much of this information on their blog, but I will do my best to summarize, leaning heavily on their research because this is truly a tangled and confusing web to parse. In 2012, Spectacle Films, according to all relevant data, began in earnest to create a documentary on a fake Satanist religious organization. In 2014, Doug Missico registered United Federation of Churches LLC, which was registered as doing business under the name The Satanic Temple. This was still early in the temple's lifespan, and since then certain things have changed. Like in 2014, when the Satanic Temple took the stance that churches should pay taxes. This post was a few months before Doug Missico would found a separate company, Reason Alliance Limited, as a nonprofit organization.
What really got them going was, we are going to oppose a public Ten Commandments monument with our own thing. Ha ha ha, we're going to use religious loopholes against them. But again, I don't think they expected to get tens of thousands of dollars donated. And in January of 2013, the only entity that exists is a for-profit movie production company. It's where was that money going? We don't know. It's not until, I think, this is all from memory, February of 2014 that Doug Missico, aka Lucian Greaves, sets up United Federation of Churches, LLC, which has a doing business as name, the Satanic Temple. So the first dedicated corporation is a for-profit corporation, the United Federation of Churches, LLC, doing business as the Satanic Temple. And then at that point, they're saying all churches should be taxed. And they have a petition about that. But within a few months, they've already set up their first nonprofit, and that nonprofit is Reason Alliance Limited. So Reason Alliance Limited comes around September of 2014. So they've got two different organizations, but they, over the years, are either solely or jointly owned by Doug Missico and Kevin Soling and their pseudonyms, because sometimes they put their legal names on these corporations and sometimes they put their fake names, which you're not allowed to do. When you sign government documents, you got to use your government name. And you certainly can't put your government name and a pseudonym on in two separate places, two different people. That's not a thing that you can do, but it's a thing TST has done habitually since about 2014.
This has led to what the Arkansas government called a shell game in a 2018 lawsuit, where the Satanic Temple and its various incorporated entities have been purposely obscured in the financial status of their legal actions, donations, and expenditures, and what Doug Missico and Kevin Solling take home are incredibly hard to find details on. Either by willful ignorance or intentional malice, I can't personally say. I can't say for certain, and for legal reasons, I won't try to determine. Literally every source I've spoken to have warned me about this video opening me up to potential harassment and litigation from the Satanic Temple and its followers. The problem is that money would be moved between the for-profit and non-profit companies under this umbrella between Kevin Solling and Doug Missico, with very little oversight or accountability, including for the tens of thousands that might roll in when they engaged in any of their previously mentioned legal escapades and got the church publicity. And that's not speculation, that's a matter of legal record. In 2020, for a deposition over the then ongoing Ten Commandments case, Doug admitted as much in court documents. Or in a later lawsuit where Missico describes being paid $4,000 for services from the Satanic Temple during the construction of a monument for another publicity stunt in Belle Plaine in 2017. This, despite the fact that, according to IRS filings in 2017, the Reason Alliance paid $0 to either Kevin Solling or Doug Missico. From Queer Satanic, quote, he got paid $4,000 that ultimately came from people giving to a fundraiser they believed was intended to create a veterans monument in Belle Plaine. But that money was directly given to an Indiegogo campaign under the name Lucien Greaves, a trademark of UFC LLC, and raised it for Reason Alliance, but we can't really say that's where it went. On sworn testimony, the two men who own and officially control all the money say they don't know where it went either. More generally, they don't seem to treat Reason Alliance and United Federation of Churches as distinct, end quote. Many of these revelations are amid the temple's reticence to provide any documentation, often attempting to hide behind the Satanic Temple's status as a church, because churches are generally afforded much less scrutiny in financial law.
So, to review, we've got United Federation of Churches, LLC, doing business as the Satanic Temple. Then you've got a nonprofit called Reason Alliance Limited that also sometimes has on this budget line, Reason Alliance /TST. And then you have a tax-exempt church or something seeking tax-exempt church approval as just the Satanic Temple, full stop. All of these are owned by the same people. All of them are headquartered out of the same location, a location that also is a corporation unto itself. Okay. It's only after in like February of 2019 that the Satanic Temple, the tax-exempt church, gets that IRS approval. Then they changed the name to the Satanic Temple Incorporated. And the Satanic Temple Incorporated is what most people think of when they say that like Satanism is a IRS approved religion. That's not true. It means that that incorporated entity got approval as a tax exempt church. That's it. And what makes those different is they don't have to file public Form 990s. The nice thing about being a church in the United States is not even so much that you don't have to pay taxes, is that you don't have to have any financial transparency whatsoever.
This quote from an Arkansas Online article about a 2019 lawsuit is a little long, but bear with me because it does a good job at encapsulating how the Satanic Temple and their lawyers purposefully obfuscate during legal proceedings. Quote, Michael Cantrell, an attorney with the Office of the Arkansas Attorney General representing Secretary of State Thurston, accused attorneys for the Satanic Temple, an intervener in the case, of not turning over relevant documents sought by his office. They claim that they are the United Federation of Churches, LLC. They claim to be the Satanic Temple, Inc., repeatedly rejected requests and refused to turn over documents on the grounds that the Satanic Temple is not, quote, unquote, a discrete entity, Cantrell said. Quote, we've asked the court to compel the Satanic Temple to provide documents responsive to those requests. Matt Keziah, attorney for the Satanic Temple, maintained that all documents sought by Thurston's attorneys had been turned over as ordered. Keziah said his understanding was that the Satanic Temple, Inc. was the only entity covered under the discovery order. He said that up until recently, the Satanic Temple, Inc. was listed as the Satanic Temple, which he added was perhaps the basis for the confusion. He accused the state of not responding to his requests for clarity. Cantrell accused Keziah of being less than forthcoming, however, about the role of the Satanic Temple, Inc. in the lawsuit to the exclusion of other entities, saying the organization is active in a number of areas through its affiliate entities and local chapters. Quote, the Satanic Temple includes more than just the Satanic Temple, Inc., he said. This appears to be a shell game the Satanic Temple is playing in trying to avoid providing responsive documents that we've been trying to get for well over 2 years now, end quote. And this convoluted shell game seems to be the point of the Satanic Temple's company structure, to obfuscate and confuse. They began taking donations and working officially as a religious organization in 2019, renaming everything under the broad banner, the Satanic Temple Incorporated. Again, from Queer Satanic, quote, "For the casual observer or supporter, it is thus extremely easy to overlook the difference between donations to nonprofit church, the Satanic Temple Inc., and merchandise purchased from for-profit business, the Satanic Temple, because there is almost nothing on the site to suggest there is difference at all," end quote. And the thing is, these two companies aren't the only ones under this umbrella. 64 Bridge LLC does business under the name Salem Art Gallery, which is owned by Kevin Solling and is based at the exact same address as the Satanic Temple. On the Facebook page for the Satanic Temple of Salem, Salem Art Gallery is listed right next to the main TST branch. There's Cinephobia LLC, again owned by Kevin Solling, under his alias Malcolm Jerry, and again based at the exact same address as the Satanic Temple. Cinephobia ran the Satanic Temple TV starting in 2019. Then there's Winstonian Enterprises Limited, which is only perhaps tangentially related to the Satanic Temple and claims to, quote, "operate the Satanic Estate and its properties, including the Satanic Temple virtual headquarters," according to the LLC website. Winstonian Enterprises is another piece with a bizarre history, as it was originally known as Goddess, the American Stripper Limited, which was intended to be a streaming series for Casey Kreider, who was dating Mystico at the time, and by some accounts still is, but that's not the only person in Doug's dance card. We will get to all of that in a moment. Kreider is the only person listed on the incorporation and has been media liaison for the Colorado chapter of the Satanic Temple in the past. In the tradition of Solling's documentary work, Goddess, the American Stripper, was meant to be, according to an Instagram account, a, quote, political drama series about strippers leveraging senators, lobbyists, to open the club of our dreams. It was intended to be crowdfunded for 3 seasons, but by April of 2020, the crowdfund, which began in January, had only raised $2,000 of the $100,000 they were asking for. It was eventually revealed that 90% of the 75-person team had lost their jobs, and a new campaign was started to help get those people some money to pay bills. By December 2020, Casey Kreider, aka Ada King, announced the project was on indefinite hiatus and she was working on tsthq.com, which redirects to the Satanic Temple. Kreider appears to be the director of weddings now at the temple under the Satanic Temple on LinkedIn. So, in one building, you have the Satanic Temple Inc., but that building is also headquarters for 4 other companies, most of which are for-profit organizations. And despite some public motions towards transparency, there's very little actually known about what the Satanic Temple does with its donations, how they're divided or moved between companies, and what kind of cut Mystico and Solling walk away with. And that's before talking about the lack of transparency over how the Satanic Temple money is used for lawsuits, and not just the lawsuits that have been widely publicized, but lawsuits Mystico and Solling constantly wield against anybody who might speak up against them. And this includes attempting to crowdfund $30,000 to pursue lawsuits against former members who were critical of Doug and Kevin's leadership, which we will certainly get to. But after talking about their history of activism and the opaque nature of their financials, I need to dive into the way the Satanic Temple is organized and how that has led to constant allegations of harassment and abuse. TST works through an umbrella approach, where different chapters or congregations are founded and run independently, yet under the governing and rules set forward by Mystico and Solling. And quite literally, despite the free speech the temple often advocates for, they have enacted bylaws specifically stating the chapters cannot represent the Satanic Temple on issues without the explicit consent of Solling and Mystico. In this handy little media primer, the Satanic Temple explicitly states when it comes to media outreach that, quote, any and all media outreach must be approved by the Satanic Temple National Council. Proposed press releases originating from a chapter should be approved by the chapter head and the chapter's media liaison, then submitted to National Council for approval, end quote. See also the Code of Conduct, which says only officially recognized media liaisons and spokespersons are authorized to provide statements on behalf of TST. Consequently, you should not appear in videos, documentaries, news media broadcasts, or in any public capacity that would give a public appearance of officially representing the Satanic Temple unless leadership explicitly authorizes such appearances. As mentioned above, the Satanic Temple has their members sign a non-disparagement agreement, or here called an NDA, and I can't imagine they allow for much more freedom than the Code of Conduct or Media Primer. Notes from chapter meetings also show they have people dedicated to finding dissenters online and keeping tabs on them, including former members. This is something that's been additionally logged in court documents. The Satanic Temple has managed to use its media appearances to create an image for itself of a grassroots progressive organization with an edgy appearance. And for many former evangelicals, left-leaning activists, and others looking for a way to make tangible change in the world, it seems like the perfect place for that. Yet with its rapid expansion, a series of controversies, and self-serving leadership, the Satanic Temple has likely done more harm than good, not just in terms of lawsuits and legal actions, but to its own members. In a fawning New York Times piece on Greaves and the Church from 2015, the Satanic Temple is described as already having amassed 20 chapters and 20,000 Facebook followers, and that was just in the span of 3 years. The piece also describes, in Missico's words, his fixation with Satanism dating back to the Satanic Panic of the 80s and his youth. It does not ever go into his fixation with mind-controlling cults. I wonder why. See, like Anton LaVey's Church of Satan, so much of the Satanic Temple's ethos on the surface might seem progressive. It is a spit in the face of stuffy evangelical conservatism that seems to dominate American political discourse, and the Satanic Temple taking real measures to put boots on the ground against groups like the Westboro Baptist Church gave the impression of an organization dedicated to fighting for progressive values. Even the tenets of the temple, which seemingly advocate for equality and egalitarianism, seem tailor-made for a diverse political movement. Yet, also like LaVey's church, and inextricably linked to Greaves, Bugbee, and Soling's fixation with libertarianism and free will, the Satanic Temple, beneath its progressive veneer of egalitarianism, is a breeding ground for reactionary thought and bigotry. Deep in its DNA, it still has the fascist undertones from Might is Right that have allowed the Satanic Temple to victimize its members, with its leadership seeing themselves often as beyond criticism or oversight. One of the many tenets of the Satanic Temple has always been free speech and advocating for it, which is a good thing. Tenet number 4 is the freedoms of others should be respected, including the freedom to offend. To willfully and unjustly encroach upon the freedoms of another is to forego one's own. But what if someone else's free speech directly impeded some of the other tenets? For example, violent hate speech or inciting speech that would counter the very first tenet of the temple. One should strive to act with compassion and empathy towards all creatures in accordance with reason. Or the second, the struggle for justice is an ongoing and necessary pursuit that should prevail over laws and institutions. Both of these tenets would, at first glance, seem to apply to a moral imperative to stop something bad from happening to others. But what about free speech? And how is that different from hate speech? The thing about free speech is that there comes a point when the things you say and the platform you can say it from may lead to real outcomes that you no longer control. You control what you say, who you say it to, and what ideas you put into the minds of the people you're speaking to, but you can't control what they do with it. Libs of TikTok, for example, spreads lies and paranoia about trans people. She doesn't directly incite violence, but leads her audience to believe it might be an acceptable solution to the problems she presents. So if someone is inspired by her rhetoric into violence against trans or queer people, or someone harasses a trans person because they believe they're a groomer or a pedophile based on her speech, she technically has done nothing wrong. However, her provable lies have still manifested in harming others due to her massive platform. People may be incited by extreme or hateful rhetoric, and while you can't control what someone else will do, you can't encroach upon their freedoms, as the fourth tenet might say. I think there's a strong argument to be made that for the freedom and well-being of others, you should try to limit speech that may lead to radicalization and incitement. Speech that is based in lies, bigotry, and outright is meant to spread falsehoods to scapegoat and blame racial, sexual, or gender minorities. Speech that can lead to others being harmed and infringed upon. If you yell fire in a crowded theater, you're free to do so, fire or not. But at what point are you responsible if somebody gets trampled to death in the panic, and there was never a fire to begin with? Well, according to Greaves, free speech is immutable. Greaves, Doug Missico, I feel I need to remind, after everything we've already talked about, literally already had radio shows about beloved fascist texts and actual neo-Nazis. But let's talk about after the Satanic Temple was founded. In 2016, he canceled an appearance due to the venue canceling the appearance of known neo-Nazi Sol Invictus. In his Facebook post talking about his choice to cancel as a matter of free speech, he says that while Sol Invictus is known for fascist leanings, that, quote, fascism legitimately has a place in discussions upon political philosophies. He tries to spin this as an attempt to understand the broader spectrum of political thought, following up with, quote, do we truly know what we're for if we refuse to discuss what we're against, end quote. Which is a valid point, and one you should keep in mind for later, when Missico and the Satanic Temple continually try to shut their critics down for exercising free speech. But who is Sol Invictus, and what did he advocate for that Lucian thinks had a place in discussions of political philosophies? In 2016, Sol, a Florida lawyer who had defended neo-Nazis in court, was accused of assaulting a woman physically and sexually. From a Florida Politics write-up, quote, the police report allegations include her description of a March 2016 incident in which she alleged Mr. Invictus got angry, beat her until her eyes were shut, dragged her into the closet, and put a gun to her head, asking her why he shouldn't just kill her. A similar incident happened again in January-February of 2017, where he dragged her into the closet and put a gun to her head, beat her, and attempted to suffocate her. This went on for several hours. And then he proceeded to sexually assault her, end quote. Invictus claimed that these charges were part of a conspiracy against him by the Florida Libertarian Party, who had been drawing some bad press because of his ill-fated Senate run. According to this write-up from the Miami Herald, Sol had drunk goat's blood as part of a pagan ritual, written a paper praising eugenics. Why does that sound familiar? And openly admitted to being friends with white supremacists during a campaign event. Like, he didn't try to sugarcoat it even a little bit. In a 2015 post by Invictus' running opponent Adrian Wiley, Wiley levels several interesting accusations against Invictus, saying, quote, he has described himself as an American fascist, and even his campaign logo is nearly identical to that of Benito Mussolini. He has displayed swastikas in his published campaign materials. He has expressed support for a eugenics program which would sterilize, euthanize, or forcibly abort, quote, the weakest, the least intelligent, and the most diseased, end quote. It shouldn't surprise you to know Invictus has been charged and accused of plenty of aggravated crimes, has a history of advocating violence, is an open racist and misogynist, and here's the cover for a book he wrote about his own legend to tell you everything you need to know. All of this is publicly available knowledge, and much of it was available in 2016 when Lucian advocated for platforming him. Oh, and of course, Invictus is a big fan of survival of the fittest type philosophies like those espoused in the original Might is Right. He's constantly blamed Antifa for opposing him throughout his political career, and he also spoke at the deadly Unite the Right protest in Charlottesville in 2017. I'm sure these are entirely coincidental that Sol shares a passion for eugenics and Mussolini, both things Doug has had fondness for in the past, but you know what else Greaves and Sol Invictus share? A hate for Antifa. In 2019, Missico defended known liar and, shocker here, friend of nationalists and white supremacists, Andy Ngo. When he was given his just desserts in the form of a milkshake to the noggin, Missico, the leader of a supposedly progressive organization, simply parroted right-wing talking points that anti-fascist protesters have always advocated open violence, and whatever violence they're met with is justified as a result. This narrative is interesting because it's one you almost exclusively find in far-right spaces. There's a lot more coming, but these two examples are just a good way to show that despite being a quote-unquote progressive movement, there was still an undercurrent of reactionary right-wing politics alive and well in the Satanic Temple well after its founding. Or, at the very least, some kind of kinship with the far right. For every time the Satanic Temple may have done good in getting abortion rights, there's a time Lucian says we shouldn't punch Nazis. Or at the very least, they rub shoulders with the far right, like this Breitbart interview of Lucian from TST Director of Ministry Greg Stevens. Or Kevin Solling, whose predilection for advocating homeschool continued well into 2015 with appearances on Fox News' Laura Ingraham show. From Queer Satanic. Quote, even more recently, the Daily Caller quoted Solling about his homeschool initiative in April 2020 in his role as president of Ideological Diversity, which describes itself as a student organization at Harvard Kennedy School. Meanwhile, the other lead in the group is Corey DeAngelis, adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute and senior fellow at the American Federation for Children, a dark money right-wing school privatization group. The only other media covering that April 2020 event was the Foundation for Economic Education, a Koch-funded right-wing libertarian economic think tank. End quote. And taken as an isolated incident, maybe you could chalk the early 2000s Midas Right broadcast up to a mistaken youthful one-off. But even long after the founding of the temple, a foundation that is mired in questions about the original intent of the Satanic Temple as a movement, or rather, a money-making experiment, these ties to the alt-right continued. As did a series of spurious legal actions that seemed to only serve the interest of temple leadership, using church resources for things like suing Netflix over the iconography used in The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, which was settled. Still, for many, this lawsuit seemed like yet another attempt to grab headlines, yet with no real progressive angle, just money. Also in 2018, Lucian announced they were suing Twitter over his account being briefly suspended and not given verified status. I specifically use the word Lucian announced they were suing Twitter because the Satanic Temple would later sue for defamation in an article talking about the suit, characterizing the choice to say the Satanic Temple sued as defamatory, despite the fact that he himself used this same wording in the past. And just think of the money he could have saved if he had just waited for Elon to take over. Yet still, apparently this righteous verification crusade necessitated a crowdfunding effort. These ridiculous lawsuits and self-serving actions bring me to one more firm tie between the Satanic Temple and the far right, the hiring of lawyer Mark Randazza. The hiring of Mark led to a split from the Los Angeles TST SAC, who cited hiring Randazza to sue Twitter as the final straw in a long line of deliberations. For his part, Misko played a similar card as he did talking about Sol Invictus, portraying the hiring of Mark as a sign of good faith for free speech, that all voices should be heard and the marketplace of ideas would separate wheat and chaff. So, what's so bad about Mark Randazza that people would separate their entire chapter from the main Satanic Temple body? Well, at the time of the suit, Randazza had been representing Alex Jones against the Sandy Hook parents who had been undergoing years of harassment for Jones lying about them and portraying them as crisis actors and their dead children as not existing. But 3 years before that, Randazza had become embroiled in controversy involving porn websites like Xvideos and Kink.com and massive copyright lawsuits over reposted porn. Apparently during this time he engaged in plenty of bribes, which is uncool, and even had his office space used in gay pornography, which is pretty cool if you're into it. During arbitration for a complicated copyright case, he was accused of taking a $75,000 bribe, which culminated in this from Ars Technica. Quote, Randazza continues to deny any wrongdoing and is fighting the award in Nevada State Court. In the meantime, he has filed for bankruptcy despite having earned more than $1.5 million over his 3-year stint at Liberty. His hiring contract showed a starting salary of $208,000, plus bonuses for resolving cases, and Dunlap said the salary neared $300,000 by the time of his departure, end quote. So after this controversy and being investigated by several state bar associations, Randazza became a full-time free speech crusader like he's known today. And by free speech, I mean a long history of aligning with Nazis and unscrupulous assholes who would be okay being represented by a bribe lawyer. Notably, he defended Andrew Anglin, neo-Nazi and owner of the Daily Stormer, who was accused of doxing. Randazza's defense was that there was no proof to show that the harassment the victim received was from Anglin publishing their name and address, which the court looked at and laughed. During the trial, he likened the Nazi to Thomas Paine as a bold free speech crusader, and I get needing to defend scumbags sometimes, but Randazza seems to go out of his way to exclusively defend the most far-right figures he can find. In a great write-up of Randazza from Above the Law, I found this little chestnut that really sums him up nicely.
If you want to represent detestable clients, fine. But when you go out into the media and don't just defend them, but actually adopt their logic and moral arguments, that's different. Then it looks like you agree with them. And if you agree with them, you can no longer avail yourself of the lawyerly presumption that you are just doing your job. Instead of being a mere part of the process, you become part of the problem.
So with all of this in mind, the choice to hire Randazza for the Twitter suit and then defend that position is another in a long line of choices that makes you look at Misako and Solling's history with bigots and go, And some of the Satanic Temple's defenders will portray the association between the Satanic Temple and Randazza as a one-off, except Kevin Solling and the Temple continued to work with Randazza, including during trademarking and other cases like using him on their Boston Invocation lawsuit and a 2020 lawsuit over the Mississippi flag. Oh, and in his legal complaint of the Satanic Temple, Randazza listed Misako alongside other luminaries like Laura Loomer and Richard Spencer as political figures, which are two very specifically right-wing political figures to choose. So with these lawsuits and controversies in mind, it's fitting that 2018 would be the year that people really started falling away from the Satanic Temple. Which brings me to Jex Blackmore and the litany of controversies faced by the Satanic Temple and how they've gone out of their way to silence any dissenters through lawsuits. Jex Blackmore was a former spokesperson for the Satanic Temple who left in 2018. They were an activist and practicing Satanist who were asked to join in 2014 and saw the temple grow from a grassroots movement to having chapters all across the country, an online store, and a more formidable legal presence that fought for progressive values. At least on the surface. In a Medium blog post, Jex talks about the Satanic Temple as essentially a boys' club, where straight men are often given priority to speak at events like those for abortion rights, and measures for more equitable diversity are dismissed outright, in addition to sexism and sexual harassment. From Jex's 2018 blog post. Quote, over the years, members and chapter heads have requested and proposed the implementation of a gender, sexual, and racial diversity policy to ensure equity within TST leadership and alignment to the mission. The demand was not simply ignored, but completely dismissed. The demand was not hollow. There was a clear and pressing need for this policy. While I was part of the organization, I witnessed male members of the organization exploit their position and influence to behave inappropriately and disrespectfully towards women. I myself experienced harassment and abuse from members who have now left the organization. I was not supported by leadership during these times, but I was asked to let it all blow over. I don't speak for anyone but myself, but I know that my experience is one of many examples of systematic gaslighting, degradation, and bullying that many women have experienced within the Satanic Temple over the years. End quote. See, while the tenets of the temple seem to profess egalitarian and progressive values, the system the temple is based upon, one which the founders act as unilateral figureheads giving power to the chapter heads beneath them, means that the Satanic Temple as an organization still appealed to the might is right mentality, that some people are inherently placed in power above others. Power that, as Jex mentions, was used for harassment and disrespect. Yet here it's worth mentioning that the Satanic Temple got a boost in popularity in 2019 from the documentary film Hail Satan. Hail Satan appears to be the culmination of Solling's work to turn the Satanic Temple into a documentary, though it's hard to find any concrete links. It does contain footage originally shot from the Rick Perry, Florida rally in 2013, and it's prominently used for publicity materials. Like most of the mainstream coverage of the Satanic Temple at the time, it depicts the temple largely as a progressive force for good, but even by 2019, victims began to know what a facade that was. I want to give a heavy content warning for the next section because there is a lot. Content warnings apply for descriptions of assault, sexual violence, harassment, and manipulation. While it might be too on the nose for Doug to run the Satanic Temple like an actual cult, there are plenty of stories from former temple members that seem to describe some incredibly cult-like behaviors, including isolating members, spreading defamation about former members, and attempting to silence any dissent. We will talk more about the cultish structure of the Satanic Temple and especially the money side of things because while the temple takes donations to fight their progressive causes, those causes by necessity would include the lawsuits they've pushed against former members and detractors. But for now, I want to talk about the mentality this power structure has fostered and how the behaviors of its leaders have led to tangible harm. The thing about this cult mentality and the organization of the Satanic Temple's power structure isn't that it just allows for people like Misako and Solling to profit, but it creates a culture of victimizers who use their power over others, forcing themselves on others and silencing any dissent like a fascist. Or maybe ideas of social Darwinism, like those found in Might is Right. And Jex's fears about isolating minority groups have been validated time and time again as minorities have continued to come out with stories of abuse, violation, and intimidation from other members and even leadership in the Satanic Temple. In February of 2020, someone posted to the Satanic Temple Reddit about a horrible experience at a party where they were made to dress revealingly and uncomfortably, were pressured to take alcohol or drugs to help them relax, and when they discovered they were being recorded, were told that buying a ticket to the event was a sign of consent to recording. The event hosted Doug Missico himself, as well as someone named Hollow Axis, who was apparently patrolling vigilantly for Catholic Antifas. In previous news articles, Axis has given statements as the Satanic Temple's quote-unquote security advisor. Texts were eventually shown from the Satanic Temple leadership hand-waving aside concerns that the coercive nature of these orgies were cult-like behavior, essentially justifying people being uncomfortable and blaming any victims who find themselves harassed. In 2021, on the blog Ariadne's Labyrinth, the writer gives their testimony of why they left the Satanic Temple. They describe their experience as one of coming to Satanism from a love of progressive values and working hard to help local charities. When they decided to leave after disagreements with leadership, they asked their resignation to be kept quiet. Instead, they found that word was quickly spread that they had been kicked out of the organization, while the rest of the blog post described more disciplinary action and spreading rumors about their personal life. From 2020 onward, several Facebook posts from varying accounts have levied serious allegations of a culture of sexual assault and covering it up towards the Satanic Temple chapter in Austin, Texas, including banning members for reporting said assault when it was perpetrated by someone in leadership. For many cases like this, where people were apparently abused or taken advantage of, the general church policy appears to be sweeping it under the rug and just hoping it goes away, and isolating or exiling anyone who speaks up against that. In this particular case, there was also a website put up to defame the accuser. Not only does this website name multiple people by public names, it targets them and exposes personal information including mental health issues they may have faced in the past, all in order to paint them as unreliable for their testimony. This is a classic abuse tactic and also aligns with Doug's propensity for using the internet to harass and distract from allegations against the Satanic Temple. It also applies to something called false memory syndrome, a pseudoscientific legal defense developed by two parents trying to disprove their daughter's repressed memories of abuse that surfaced in adulthood. Doug Missico knows about this from his role in the False Memory Syndrome Action Network, not to mention his previous interest in mind control and memory experiments. In 2020, another member came forward describing grooming and harassment from 2015 to 2017, which was reported and ignored according to their testimony. In 2023, another Satanist came forward with a Facebook post stating they had been dating Lucien, who, along with other members of the temple, had been pressuring this person with a history of addiction into using substances at an HQ party. Lucien was apparently into gaslighting them, and also was concurrently dating two other members of the church. They crashed their car, inebriated, after they claimed leaving the party and not being allowed to stay and sober up. In another post, they describe weird power dynamics with Doug, who apparently worked to keep the relationship a secret. This squares with other earlier testimony about Lucien dating multiple people and basically using his leadership of the Satanic Temple as a harem. This post also references something about how Lucien handled an event with Silverman, aka David Silverman, who Doug Missico had given a personal tour of the Satanic Temple's headquarters to in 2023. David Silverman is a transphobe and former member of Atheist Alliance before he was thrown out over sexual misconduct allegations. When met with backlash for being so friendly, Greaves dismissed the criticisms and refused to condemn any of his stances. Speaking of Doug, I want to talk a bit about how he uses his platform as a harem to get access to women, like depicted in a series of screenshots from a Snapchat conversation between a 19-year-old Ukrainian woman and a former member of the Satanic Temple between December 2020 and January 21. The texts show the Ukrainian woman and the member talking about relationships with Doug. The Ukrainian woman at that point had recently been shut out by Doug after an online relationship, something that former Satanic Temple member noted he had done before with other women. Reading through the texts, the 19-year-old member expresses anxieties about her body image, and the two women relate that they had both been blocked by Lucien after he was, quote, finished with them. The 19-year-old woman relates that she didn't come forward about being used by the 45-year-old Missico for fear of ruining his reputation. She shows texts where she is obviously affectionate, and him using that affection to string her along. The Satanic Temple member tells the 19-year-old that other women have come forward with similar stories about Lucien. Which is true if these texts I received from an anonymous source speaking to Lucian are anything to go by. In the text, he mentions his girlfriend, Casey Kreider, aka Ada King, and asks this new person to move to Salem. And now I need to talk about Ash Astaroth. In a 2018 blog, the writer Ash Astaroth writes about their excommunication and ensuing harassment for criticizing the Satanic Temple for being a business cult in the vein of Scientology. After their criticism of Lucian, who they note was well known to cheat on his partners with the Satanic Temple members, they were excommunicated. Along with that excommunication, they lost their housing in Salem, where they had moved to be with the temple. In their blog post, Ash Astaroth talks about Doug employing online trolls who they list under the names Adam Ostrovsky and Ragnar Santorum. These trolls were reportedly used by Doug to spread memes and dirt on the subjects of his ire, which in this case included sharing and spreading porn from before their activity in the Satanic Temple, which suspiciously began surfacing more after their criticism and harassment from the temple. The temple threatened legal action over the taking of quote-unquote Facebook pages, and according to the blog post, Lucian even visited the place this person worked to spread warning. Quote, Lucian came to my new job on a day I was off, that I happened to have just been visiting, and publicly harassed me in front of my coworkers, and then attempted to warn them about associating with me because legal papers were going to be served, effectively trying to keep me from having employment in Salem. I repeatedly told him I was not interested in speaking with him. He kept trying to get me to leave with him and talk privately. The more I refused, the more agitated and aggressive he became. My coworkers confirmed that he had been in the shop earlier before I got there and seemed to be waiting nearby for me to show up. Nothing he has to say requires an in-person visit. This was to intimidate and affect my employment. End quote. I couldn't find much else, but sources I found seem to point to Ash Astaroth living in poverty after being kicked out of the Satanic Temple and harassed. According to several sources, they passed away in January of 2024 at a young age, and I can't find anyone to confirm if they ever found a place of residence or stable housing after the blog post. It's hard to find any additional information, but the Twitter account they used to post from and for their blog hasn't posted in a window that aligns with the stated death in their obituary. There are a number of commonalities between these cases. For one, almost every victim was a woman, queer, or both, and all of their pleas for investigation, whether for harassment or assault, were overlooked, ignored, or otherwise swept away. The things Jex was worried about in 2018 did come to pass, in the process ruining lives, while temple leadership did nothing, or even worse, continued to profit. But sadly, that's not where the controversies for the temple end. In the wake of these various controversies, the Satanic Temple has been besieged by critics on all sides that it's done its best to silence through a variety of lawsuits. Which is kind of funny how Misako and Soling seem to be against former temple members speaking up, but will still work on personal projects with far-right groups. One of the most high-profile lawsuits, which garnered Newsweek attention in 2021, was an ongoing suit over the Satanic Temple Facebook pages used to share articles and opinions critical of Lucian and temple leadership. Two former members involved in that suit, David Johnson and Nathan Sullivan, who left to form the blog Queer Satanic, sat down to talk a bit about the experience and the Satanic Temple's ongoing legal battles.
2014, I started hearing about the Satanic Temple, and I'm like, okay, I am sort of mellowing out of my atheist phase, and I want to do something more meatier, I guess. And so I come across TST specifically because of a bunch of the atheist blogs and progressive feminist blogs and stuff I'm reading, because they're mostly quote mining Lucian Greaves and stuff for sticking it to various Christian Christian right figures and stuff.
Having an excuse to meet regularly, to work together towards a common goal, and also have mutual aid. That was the thing that I found to be attractive. I wasn't looking for friends or I don't know. I feel like I had enough friends and sense of community. So it was a place to go and work next to people towards a common goal. And I am pretty good at social media, at least certain kinds of social media. So I got tapped to do that. And I ended up running almost all of the local chapters, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. There was a falling out because when I came in, the understanding was that there were sort of like committees that you could be a part of, and like we collectively came to decisions based on just like common agreement. And so it wasn't a hierarchical thing as we understood it. There was an organization in Salem that didn't really have much to do with us. It was off doing its stuff. But then towards the end, the leadership was explained to be just two people making decisions over who could be in the group, period.
A couple months later, this is so March 2020, when all of this comes to a head, there was an argument that basically touched on it wasn't like part of it was on the way that the chapter leadership had mismanaged a sexual harassment case a couple years prior. This escalated into an argument of some kind. I was not there for. I saw it like unfold after the fact, or after it happened. I saw like the chat log of the argument afterward. And I saw a complaint, like an internal complaint filed by another member who got removed, right? And this member basically like experienced some like abusive behavior by one of the chapter leaders' current inner circle, basically. So, but this member who filed the complaint, they also copied me, they copied David, they copied a handful of their other friends, because they were not sure that TST Washington would handle it in good faith, basically. And so theoretically the Washington chapter head got back, they conducted an investigation into the nature of the argument, into the nature of the complaint, and like about a week or so later, they said, guess what? This complaint is proof of a conspiracy by a splinter faction of members who are planning to bully leadership and undermine our chapter, and I'm not going to stand for it. And the chapter head dissolved this management structure, the guild council thing, replaced it with a previous model, which is basically just her inner circle of buddies. And then everyone who saw this complaint, everyone who saw that initial complaint about the abusive treatment and the cover-up of the harassment, they were kicked out. We were all just kicked out.
Somebody that had been away came back in and said, actually, I'm one of the people who gets to decide who's a member here. That was a bit of a shock. And they responded to criticism over a past sexual harassment complaint by just like attacking other people in the group, and really causing a whole big thing. One of the, that was, I guess, the proximate cause was just like someone's reaction to a former member being like, I was sexually harassed, that was treated poorly, y'all didn't do a good job of it. The reaction by leadership, which ended up being two people, to that led to one of them insulting one of my co-defendants and saying that he had fucked up everything with social media and he was doing a bad job, and talking about things like ableism and transphobia wasn't what we were supposed to do in TST. But then they kicked out me, they kicked out Nathan, they kicked out Joshua's partner, they kicked out my partner, they kicked out the person who had made the complaint about sexual harassment had been taken.
The general membership of TST Washington noticed that a whole bunch of senior leaders, including like one of the founders and the first person that they met in TST, like that they were all just suddenly kicked out. And so everyone wants to know what the fuck is going on, right? So TST Washington's chapter head and media liaisons, they do a town hall on they do a Zoom call, an open town hall meeting, trying to do damage control. And they say they just straight up tell everyone, yeah, we kicked out everyone who saw this complaint because it was just stirring up drama. So they were in such a hurry to cover up this complaint that they didn't realize that the people that they kicked out, like David and Josh, were admins of the Facebook pages as well. They were like, so yeah, about a week later, like I guess like in the wake of this, like I'm, we're all swapping notes as to like how we got kicked out, like why people are realizing how like isolated from each other we had actually been as far as like being mistreated by TST Washington. And one of my friends over in Denver is like, okay, time to like, well, I guess now that you're kicked out, you got to start your own satanic organization, right? And I'm like, yeah, no, we're like, I am a couple steps ahead of you, and like we're just kind of like riffing, right? So my friend is like, okay, what are you going to call your new organization? You're going to call it like the Satanic Temple, like the Mighty Ducks, or the Satanic Temple 2 Electric Boogaloo. So like we're just riffing on media like sequel media movie titles basically. About a month later, out of the fucking blue, I get served papers saying I am being sued alongside the others, because because of they basically are trying to extrapolate the claim. So they made several allegations against us, and the like the running theme, like the justification that they have for tying all of us together, the four of us defendants, is that we at some point got together before being kicked out and planned to make a competitor organization called the Satanic Temple 2 Electric Boogaloo, and we plotted to take over their social media and establish a competitor organization and generally harm TST.
But I was still admin of the Washington State chapter Facebook page. They hadn't removed me. And I kept finding out that like there had been this kind of like pattern of mistreatment. And also the owners, Doug Masico and Kevin Soling, had a bunch of just stuff in their backgrounds they didn't want to have publicized. So for example, Doug Masico used to go by Doug Mesner, used to run in, I mean, I don't know what else to say, white nationalist, neo-national or neo-Nazi circles. And I just like posted news articles. I posted former member Jex Blackmore, what they had said when they left about the top national leadership not really caring about women and femme people, about the way that they didn't handle racism well. In 2018, a bunch of people had left and spoken out about it. And at the time, we didn't realize why everyone stopped talking about it. We found out later they had been sent legal threats. They were sent threats because they had signed non-disparagement agreements in perpetuity. Like the legal theory they were pursuing was like demonstrably untrue. Like if you sign up for Facebook's terms of service, or you just like looked at their like help center, it explained the way that Facebook pages work. And like who owns Facebook pages? Facebook does, right? I understood that I wasn't actually engaging in defamation because like I used to be a journalist. And when you're like quoting things other people have said, especially if it's true or opinion, it's not defamation. Certainly not when we're talking about like public figures. Like you have to demonstrate actual malice, et cetera, et cetera. And so like I understood this just to be a frivolous threat.
They file a defamation claim against all four of us, despite having no evidence at all that anyone besides David was related to the statements at hand. They have continuously tried to defend this by deflecting and saying, well, under civil conspiracy tort, they're all liable, actually. But like they've never actually filed that complaint because that would require them to meet the burden of proof for civil conspiracy itself. And so like that's just a cheap way of deflecting for them. About a couple months later, we're fundraising for this. That's where the bogus GoFundMe comes into play, because we set up our own defense fund, and like they respond like a week or two later by making up their own GoFundMe. And like Lucian Greaves on Twitter basically says, yeah, we set it up just to so that people have the real story if they go looking around for this legal defense. The second time around, TST accuses us of trademark infringement because their trademark has been damaged by the existence of the Satanic Temple 2 Electric Boogaloo. And there's no like the sole evidence that exists at all is that one Facebook comment made by someone who is not even in TST and lives 1,000 miles away. Like, it got thrown out because the judge was like, there is no evidence here at all that this organization exists.
It's very hard sometimes to know how much of the things they say is based off of malice and just like a calculated desire to mislead people. How much of it is incompetence that they just like can't be fucking bothered to learn anything to make accurate criticisms or whatever. To us, it doesn't make that much of a difference because the impact is the same, but it's just very tough sometimes just as like a matter of curiosity to try and like tease apart, is this malice? Is it incompetence? What is the unique mixture of this action versus that action? Yeah, that kind of thing.
So like the validity of TST's legal claims kind of rely on the prospect of the defense not actually fighting back. Because as soon as they actually do, like as soon as we actually do, you can see TST's legal strategy folding in on itself and collapsing on very basic concepts of like due process and like the burden of proof and stuff.
Additionally, the pair was interviewed by Newsweek. From Newsweek, quote, "We were pretty critical of Lucien Greaves because we found out he said the anti-Semitic stuff," said Johnson. "We thought it was okay to criticize him. Over time, it changed. Bit by bit, items critical of the Satanic Temple showed up on its Seattle chapter's Facebook page. Then in March 2020, according to the lawsuit, the defendants went rogue, causing computer hacking as well as defamation, unfair competition, cyber piracy, and tortious interference with business expectancy," end quote. The suit, filed April 3, 2020, claimed the defendants hijacked the Satanic Temple's 2 Facebook pages, posting critical comments damaging the organization's reputation and causing members to flee. The main Washington State chapter page, the suit said, had been active since 2014 and had some 17,000 followers. A more recent page, Evergreen Memes for Queer Satanic Fiends, has 500 followers. The lawsuit contends that the 4 ex-members were removed from their positions on March 2020 after a conflict with the chapter heads, but managed to later hack into the Facebook pages and post damaging material under the Satanic Temple name. The Satanic Temple sued for $143,000 in damages plus court costs. This very same Newsweek article would inspire another suit from the Satanic Temple, saying that simply compiling the various facts, Newsweek was defaming the organization and leadership. The temple has also publicly threatened to sue people over defaming them, as shown in this TikTok apology from the Satanic Housewife.
Not to give any money to the Satanic Temple to fight for abortion rights. In a recent court case for something else that TST is involved in, who can keep up at this point? Lucien openly admitted to taking the money fundraised for court cases and for abortion rights advocacy and using it to pay his personal bills instead. Aside from everything else, like the Satanic Temple suing former members to make them be quiet about the stuff they experienced while in the temple, about one of their chapter leaders being accused of sexual assault and TST kicking the victim out of the chapter, about how their head of ministry is really good friends with... I don't even know how to start this video. I made a good faith effort to try to give y'all the information that I had that I thought was valuable for you to know. And now the Satanic Temple is threatening to sue me. This is one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, for reasons that I can't even talk about. But here goes. The TikTok post I made contained many statements that are provably untrue. I regret having made the post and the harm it has unfairly and unjustly caused the Satanic Temple. I know of no credible claims that the Satanic Temple has ever misappropriated funds. The Satanic Temple's lawsuit against the Johnson defendants, who call themselves Queer Satanic, is over Facebook pages they admitted they stole from the Satanic Temple. I know of no I know of no credible claims that the Satanic Temple condones sexual assault or punishes victims of assault. I know of no credible claim that the Satanic Temple has alt-right ties. I sincerely apologize for my hurtful, misleading, and dishonest statements.
And these are just a few of the people I've found publicly or managed to speak with. Plenty of other people back down at the very threat of legal action, which is something the Satanic Temple knows. Most average people don't have the resources or money to wage legal battle against a nationwide organization, even one as poorly run as the Satanic Temple. In turn, the temple uses that to their advantage, to silence dissent. I've been warned multiple times by multiple different people that I spoke with that there is a high likelihood Doug and Kevin will try to sue even over this video. So with that in mind, let's talk about what should be done next. I hope by now I've shown how at every level, the Satanic Temple as an organization cannot be trusted. As a progressive organization, it has succeeded largely due to the hard work of grassroots members who were drawn in by advocating for causes like abortion rights, yet they are not the people who have benefited from the Satanic Temple. It's the people at the top who have documented histories of grifting, selling sensational stories, fixations with fascism, and associations with far-right figures who've profited most. We don't know exactly how much they've profited exactly because of the lengths they've gone to hide it. But we do know that they see the Satanic Temple and its advocating for progress as a cash cow. And they've seemingly always intended it to be nothing more. And everything I've said in this conclusion so far has been simple facts that we've covered in depth, with my own personal opinion sprinkled in for comedic effect or nuance. But because I've been repeatedly warned by multiple sources that the Satanic Temple might try and come after me for defamation, I want to make clear that this next part is simply my personal opinion. Despite their facade of well-intentioned transgression towards right-wing Christian fundamentalism, the way Misako and Sullivan have gone about suppressing dissent, manipulating people, isolating and humiliating the subjects of their ire, and wielding their power to silence others makes this feel more like a mainstream church than anything else. I don't know if they genuinely intended to do good with the Satanic Temple as a platform, but by all accounts, they haven't. They haven't made tangible progress towards protecting abortion rights, towards protecting members of its minority communities or trans or LGBTQ people who are under legislative attack across the country. They have created an internal culture of abuse and covering it up, sweeping it under the rug like Catholics moving a priest from one parish to another. All the while, they've reaped the benefits of generosity from people who are simply tired of being sidelined, tired of being targeted by conservative and evangelical lobbies. So what can we do with this information? Because the Satanic Temple is an organization seemingly rotting from the core outwards, yet it still has innumerable members who do believe in the fight for equality and progress. There are plenty of modern Satanists who have found friends or partners in the church. Like any group of people coming together over common interests, there's good to be found here. If you're an active member of a local congregation and you find the egalitarian beliefs behind the Satanic Temple to be effective political theater or just genuinely believe them, there's nothing stopping you from practicing them outside of the Satanic Temple's purview. There's nothing to be lost by assembling with other like-minded Satanists to create new groups and attempt to protest in favor of progressive causes. And in doing so, you gain absolute freedom. Freedom from an organization that doesn't allow you to step out of line. And instead, you can find a voice together. The kind of freedom from regressive ideology that made Lucifer a figurehead in the first place. Satanism as a concept, from LaVey to the Satanic Temple's version, has always felt tilted towards a progressive veneer that still welcomed edgy right-wingers and fascists, but that's not what Satanism has to be. If you want a truly progressive organization, you shouldn't have to put up with platforming Nazis, virulent bigots, transphobes, and other people who would gladly put members of that organization at risk. You don't need to hear out arguments for fascism or racism under the guise of free speech, because we already know the arguments, we know how they're made, and we know where they end up. The goal of an organization that truly fights for equality shouldn't be to platform voices that speak against diversity or keep a power structure that puts straight white men at the top. It should be an organization where everyone is treated as equals, one that focuses on how to bring those ideals to a wider audience. The Satanic Temple's structure and systems of abuse and manipulation are the logical endpoint for one reading of Satanism. It's one way to see these tenets that glorify the self and advocate for free expression. It's an old, outdated way. Its might is right. But the promise of the Satanic Temple, of applying those ideas to a wider progressive lens, can still be valuable, glorifying yourself not in terms of holding power over others or living hedonistic lifestyles, but in terms of advocating for yourself and others like you, forming communities to help the targeted and ostracized, advocating for free expression not as a legal trick or an excuse to platform and align with far-right voices, but advocating for free expression as a sincere commitment to creating an open and inviting space where all are welcomed and considered without fear of reprisal. Yet, still a space that doesn't allow for voices that would infringe upon that expression. Free speech doesn't mean hate speech. And by its very nature, hate speech is harmful to free speech. If you, as a Satanist, truly want to use Satan as a figurehead of independence, knowledge, and rationality and reason, there's no reason why you should fall under the command of an organization that stands against so many of those things through their actions. And if you find yourself wanting to help these causes like women's healthcare rights, fighting against legislation targeting queer people, or any other progressive legislative causes, you don't need a Molgoth aesthetic to do it. I've listed some good charities and causes down below that you can look into if you feel so inclined. At the end of the day, the Satanic Temple has shown time and again that they, for all their grandstanding, are not a bastion of equality or egalitarian values. And the people who come to the church looking for a way to advocate for causes they care about and find community deserve better. But as to what becomes of the Satanic Temple, well, that is a devilish story for another day. In the meantime, darling, I want to thank you all for joining me on this hellish journey. And until we meet again, pleasant screams.